Hello and welcome to this YouTube page. My name is Grace with creationalcodes.com. I'm so thankful that you're here with me today, continuing on the energy work series. This is episode 4, all about dimensionalities, dimensions, how we work with them, what they mean. I always say this in the beginning of these episodes, but I highly recommend that you check out the other episodes because we are kind of continuing up on episode after episode inside of the information I'm giving. As well, please like this video, please subscribe if you're here. I'm so thankful that you're here with me. I'm putting a lot of effort and intention into these videos, so I really appreciate your support. If you want to subscribe or comment, or potentially I will be making a donation page so I can continue making these for fun, for free. But yes, dimensions, I'm really excited to get into it. This is going to be a 2-part conversation, so this is gonna be part 1 and then we're gonna have a part 2 because dimensions, there's so much information to be given as well. Like I said, there's a lot of information online that you can find in regards to dimensionality, dimensions. When you talk about dimensions, you get into quantum information, you start diving into, like, the gateway is really open when you start talking about dimensions and quantumality. Entities, energies start opening and advancing, and please do your own research inside of dimensions if you feel called to. This is my own gnosis at this point in time. I've been studying this concept for about 4 years now, and I've actually kind of threw everything that I knew in the garbage a couple weeks ago. Not in the garbage, but I'm kind of just recouping inside of what I believe is true, because there's a lot of teachers online, there's a lot of people that you can listen to, but the greatest form of information is the simplest form of information. So that's why I try to make these videos as simple as possible, digestible as possible, because you need to, as a viewer, as a listener, make it into what it is for you. I'm not here to tell you what that is. I'm not here to break it down and make it exactly how I perceive it. It's actually really important that you do that for yourself so that you can appreciate and enjoy the information from source itself. So dimensions, let's get into the conversation. An overview of the concepts we're going to talk about in this video, in this episode, is what are dimensions, good and bad dimensions, first dimension through 12th. Duality through dimensions, selves in dimensions, different selves, and wholeness. Why dimensions matter in fieldwork, and finding your own meaning and allocation for each dimension. I can't dive into everything. It'll be like a 2-hour long video, so I'm gonna try and break it down into like 2 30-minute-ish videos for you. But what are dimensions? So what I received is that a really good way to look at this in terms of a digestible form of perceiving dimensions, perceiving quantum information, is looking at it as if layers. So there are many different forms of like perceiving and visualization of like layers. So you could perceive a cake, you could perceive the earth and the different cores of the different layers of the earth all the way down to the core. And when you look at a layer of cake, you could perceive that if you are a consciousness kind of going up through the layers, you would have known, and you would know the layers that you've already been through, but you wouldn't have a perfect idea of what the layers above you would look like. So dimensionality is quite the same, that the layers that you already have been through, or the dimensions that you already have been through or have gained consciousness through, will be very relevant for you. But the dimensions higher than you might not know what they are. You might not have information coming through those higher dimensional planes. You might not have an awareness or a relationship with those higher dimensional planes, and that's totally fine. It's just because as humans we are currently stationed at the 3rd dimensional plane, which is actually a very, very dense place to be, and that's why, you know, our lives are the way that they are. That's why there's a lot of horrible things happening on the planet, is because we are in such a low density place right now, consciousness place right now. And if we were in the higher dimensional planes, the traumatization that we've been through, the world events that are going on would not be possible, because the higher up you go in terms of dimensionality, the more pure you become, the more connected to God you become. So you could even perceive dimensionality and the lower dimensions as the furthest away from God you can go. Similar to, like, you know how we have 3D animation at this point. We used to have just like 2D animation, and there's 4D and 5D that they're coming out with. And if you look at something like one-dimensional drawing, you can only look at it straight on. There's no other information to be provided for you. It just is maybe a square box or a triangle or a circle. There's no other dimensionality to it. And that is another way that you could perceive the first dimension or the second dimension or the third dimension. So the dimensions are very quantum. They're very, they just like this video is going to be really interesting to film, because when you start getting into dimensions, everything starts kind of blurring. There are very important truths that we're going to stick within, because that's what happens when you go into the fourth and fifth dimension, is that the lines become blurred. You know, there are fallen truths that people try to spread about them, but so good and bad dimensions, there's not really such a thing as good and bad dimensions. It's all about how you perceive it yourself. So if you were to perceive something good as your own virtues, your own morality, like God is everywhere. God is creation. So if you were to perceive first dimension as a very bad dimension, that's like a pretty uninformed way to look at it, because it's basically just something that has fallen far away from God. It still is God, and it's something that needs to be healed and needs to be repaired. It's not something that we need to condemn or be angry about. You know, even being stuck in the third dimension at this point in time, it's not something we need to be angry about. It's something that we need to honor and become aware of, so that we can grow inside of that and become better and more embodied and more enlightened. Thus, we can go into higher dimensional planes, making peace with where we are, and, you know, understanding that we're everything all at once. We are connected to the lower dimensional planes. Like, you have access to everything once you understand what it is, and you understand your potentiality as a creator being to connect with those aspects of self, all the dimensions. So, like, good dimensions and bad dimensions, even the fourth dimension, like the astral, this is the only area that I really give kind of warning signs to, because, and of course, like 3D, but things get tricky when you're on the spiritual journey and you're kind of playing within the astral fields, in my opinion, because there's just a lot of information, depending on how sensitive you are, depending on how kind of open your field is to information. You just might be absorbing more than what you actually need to be absorbing. And the only thing within that is that we just want to be careful and aware of what is actually serving us and what isn't serving us. So in the fourth dimension, you do have access to a lot more information. That's where, you know, spirits start coming in. The third dimension is such a dense level that it's only kind of perceivable by the human eye, but when you go into the fourth and fifth dimensions, you are interacting with spirits of a higher degree. So it could be demons, it could be entities, it could be angels. Angels can come in at any point, even in the third and probably second and first dimension. But in the fourth dimension, fifth dimension, when you're operating in those levels, everything is just more apparent. It's more in front of you. So again, that's not a bad thing. It's just something that we need to be aware of. It's just something that we need to be cognizant of, and using our informed self to, you know, behave correctly, take care of self, take care of this embodiment, take care of all aspects of self, so that we can be the best version of self and continue on our journey to wholeness with God's source. Duality through dimensions. This is a really awesome topic. So duality is really just this idea that we are separate from one another, and that we are separate from God, and that there is something more than one. There's two. And in this universal time, or in our universe, in the laws that kind of create our universe, there are polarities. So there's black and white, there's good and evil, there's male and female, yin and yang, night and day. There's all of these things that kind of contrast and are polarized to one another. And the reason that this is because we're in a learning cycle. So we're learning what is good and what is evil. And this is mastery, because this is a form and a opportunity to perceive yourself anew, to perceive what is you in a fallen architecture, what is you in a fallen structure. And that is what alchemy is. That's why I really love alchemy. That is what, neutrality is that, like, we're not here to reprimand anything, to say that some things are bad and wrong inside of polarity, inside of, like, the night is evil. The night serves a purpose. The evil serves a purpose, you could say, in some ways. Of course, there is a means of when things get taken out of hand and are cycling itself. And this is what has happened on this planet, in my opinion, is that things, like, we're in, per se, a science experiment, is what some people like to say. So if we're in a science experiment, and we're not science, but we're in a human consciousness experience experiment with self, wanting to learn more. But if people who are given an ego, given the right to separate from God, enjoy that, if some people are enjoying that separation too much, then the consciousness level will start deteriorating. And this is what they have done to the body of the human. Illness, aging, all of these things, that kind of make us lesser than what we are as God's children. And they separate self from God. So, having thoughts that are selfish, or having thoughts that are limiting, these are all things that separate us from God. And these are all because of the polarization that gets taken to a degree through, evil intent, through beings that are on a rampage of enjoying the power of being separate from God and being their own, like, creator, being separate and being able to survive off of that in some way, shape, or form. Like, it's very similar to the human experience of kings getting greedy off of power, off of having what they want. Like, this is kind of what's happened in the human reality, is that evil gets taken to a means of self-destruction. So that's another form of, polarization, experiencing self in a different way. But all of these things, we're not here to say that they're bad and wrong. We're just here to acknowledge them, in my opinion, and learn how to heal from them, learn how to get better from that understanding of this is going on. I take full responsibility for myself. I take full responsibility for what I am interacting with, and I choose a higher timeline. So what are selves in dimensionality and different selves in wholeness? So I feel that in the next video I'm going to break down, first to 12th dimensions, because there's a lot of information there, and I did channel my own information from source in terms of I wanted to share on this video in terms of, like, what the dimensions are and how you can interact with them. But yeah, we're just going to break down, like, the subtopics, or, like, the overlaying topics of, what even dimensions are, how we interact with them as self. So in each dimension you will have an aspect of self, and basically what this is like, if you perceived that God is the ocean, or that God is water, and each person was a drop of water, and each idea was a drop of water. If you thus then perceived that you were the ocean, and that every drop of water was an aspect of you, every thought was an aspect of you, these are like different layers to self, right? So you have an aspect of self that is perceiving reality through different lenses in numerous different dimensions. And in each dimension, you will have a greater understanding of self, or a different reality and experience with self. And this, again, is not something that you need to use the mind to interact with and try to, like, dissect and decipher, because it's not really something that the mind needs to do. And I actually would highly recommend that you don't do that, because the mind just goes crazy trying to analyze things, and the quantum reality is best perceived through the heart. So the heart is multidimensional. The heart is actually a gateway of massive information, And when we perceive through the heart, we are given even greater information because it's very clear. It's clarified through the filters of the heart, through the divine aspect of the heart. And the mind, it can be stuck in reptilian kind of zone-ins, where it likes to have its own notion of self. It likes to have the ego. It likes to analyze. It likes to know what it knows. It likes to know even what it doesn't know or what it shouldn't know. It's a bit Slytherin in style. And so, yeah, I highly recommend you perceive through the heart. And when you perceive through the heart, you can experience, different aspects of self. And when we perceive different aspects of self, we are essentially perceiving in each dimension you will have a version of you that might have traumatization in your journey. You might have beauty in your journey. You might have a lifetime that you want to digest and receive codings from. Maybe in a different dimension you are very abundant and rich, and in this dimension you would like to understand how that aspect of self did that, so you can connect with that aspect of self and try to receive the codings through divinity to understand the level of abundance that aspect of self has received. And in doing this, the goal, in my opinion, is actually just to receive and become whole in and of self. So all dimensionalities of you are you, and they are whole as and of you. So when you connect with the dimensional aspect of self, you might want to do a trauma healing on it, or an inner child healing on it, because that dimensional layer and aspect of self does have a very inherent effect on your body. And how I could describe this is like the butterfly effect. So even if something is far away from you, or energy cordings, which we talked about, I think in the second episode of this series, you have an energy cord to all multidimensional aspects of self. So when you interact with them, you will feel what they feel, and you might receive information as to why you are stuck in certain aspects of life. If a different dimensional aspect of self is traumatized inside of something and you need to take care of that in that dimension, it's going to play it's going to echo into this current dimensionality and this current timeline that you're experiencing, which again, like I said in the beginning of this video, things get weird when you work with dimensions, because we start interacting with a version of self that is so gigantic and so abundant in nature. And, even coming into wholeness with all multidimensional versions of self, it doesn't need to be a stressor inside of, I need to contain this and make sure I'm aware of everything and be in control of everything. It more so is that you are healing self so that you don't have to worry about any of that, because as you heal self and come into wholeness, your higher dimensional aspects of self are going to take care of you and provide for you in deeper ways, and you're just going to have more gnosis, more clarity, more awareness of self. So yeah, you can interact with selves that are in the lower dimensional timelines, like 3D versions of self that might be stuck in your mind or in your heart or in your spiritual field. And you can also connect with aspects of self that are in higher dimensional planes, like the 6th or 7th dimension, that might need assistance in. And it's interesting because if you are residing in a lower dimensional plane per se, in a physical form, you can still interact and heal aspects of self that are in a higher dimensional plane. So just because the physical body is in a 3D reality doesn't mean that, your heart and soul quantumly can't interact with aspects of you in a higher version of self that might need love and support and assistance. So you can interact with all layers and versions of self. And if you're a starseed or an angel or a being incarnating on this planet in this 3D reality, likely you already have, the information inside of your DNA, inside of your spiritual field, to interact with higher dimensional planes of awareness and existences And the body doesn't have to be a limitation inside of that. The body actually is literally upgrading and becoming more quantum with us every day. It's just a means of giving it the time that it needs and supporting the planet and kind of coming through these upgrades and dimensional shifts. So we can interact with it basically whenever you want to, receive information, do healings on self, interact with selves in different layers. You're not limited to, the lower dimensional planes because you believe that, or if you believe that, you're stuck in a 3D body or a 4D body and you can't perceive the 12th dimension and higher because of that. Like, there's no such thing as linear in dimensionality. Time kind of fades away. Structure in some way of limitation fades away within self, and we can interact and be fluid within interacting with all versions of self, quantumly, multidimensionally, etherically, and spiritually, inside of dimensionality through your heart field. Again, I really highly recommend you work through the heart field when you're interacting with dimensions. And wholeness exists within the dimensions as well. So anytime you're doing like multidimensional work, you're basically just informing your reality that you are a part of that other dimension and that you can access that other dimension. And when we interact with numerous dimensions, we are interacting with wholeness, because as a creator being, you have the right to interact with as many multidimensional aspects of self as you'd like, and we can merge them together and receive information from all of them all of the time. This is kind of like an aspect of wholeness, but it's not a race. I really encourage you to not like perceive this as a race, trying to heal yourself right here, right now, because it's all mental. So the reptilian mind and brain will try to inform you that you're limited, that you can't do great things, that you can't be whole, that like it'll just try to stop you from being whole in this here now moment. And that is the separation piece, is that like our gnosis of self literally begins within self. So when you decide that you are, you become it, because your body and your mind create your reality. And it depends on how you're interacting with yourself and your mind and your heart and your body, that which you are becoming. So if you're harsh on yourself and you have a timeline and you're not following the timeline and you're getting stressed out, like, you can just decide here and now, instead of putting yourself in a place of, I need to change my external reality before I am that, to inside of my internal reality, I already am that, and that reflects into my outer and external reality. So when you do that, you take the power back into your hands and you empower yourself, and you know that you are already wholeness at all times, and it's just a mental fragmentation and a game that they put on us, and a game that we are playing to perceive that we are anything but that. Especially multidimensionally, you already are that. You've always been that. And yeah, it's just an experience of remembrance, and kind of then cultivating and making new habits, making new experiences. If you want to become like super spiritual or experience your multidimensional aspects of self, it's just a habit. Like, you just have to choose that you're going to experience that every day. What does that feel like for you to be multidimensional? Maybe it's communicating with different aspects of self all the time and being in fluidity with that wholeness that you are, and you can interact with all different aspects of self, even the trees. If you feel like in a different dimension you're a tree, or if you feel really connected to an ascended master, like, connect with that aspect and allow it to integrate into your life. Allow that to become wholeness, because you are that which you believe yourself to be. And again, it's not just a mental thing. Like, it does need to be action oriented, and it does need to be imprinted into your reality in order for it to occur. But again, I just want to place emphasis on the fact that your mind plays such a huge role in this, and that's what we're freeing ourselves from, and bringing more awareness to the mind and how we can interact with the mind, so that we are liberated in all forms of self. So I thank you so much for watching this video. The next concepts are going to be in part 2, which I'm going to have out on Saturday or Sunday, and we're going to talk about 1 through 12 dimensionalities. We're going to talk about why dimensions matter in field work and finding your own meaning and allocation for each dimension, which we already kind of slightly talked about, but we're going to dive more deeply into that in the next video, part 2 of episode 4. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that it served you in some way, shape, or form. I'm so appreciative of you listening to this, and I ask and pray that you take this in to your life and to your field as it best serves you. Again, I'm sharing this information, but take it and digest it in your own way. Allow it to form itself in your reality as you'd like it to. Please subscribe and like this video. Please check out the rest of the episodes of this series. We're on episode 4 and we're going to do as many as possible. So also, if you have any ideas for what you'd like to hear about next on this series after dimensionalities, please comment those suggestions down below, and I will look at them and make a list of what is most relevant as we go through this series. Thank you so much for watching, and I wish you peace.